Mr. Preston, still clutching his phone with Alexander Thorne's face glaring up from the screen, felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. His face, usually so ruddy with self-importance, was now a sickly shade of gray. He was a successful businessman, yes, but Alexander Thorne operated on an entirely different plane of existence. Thorne Global Industries could buy and sell his entire company before lunch. The casual threats he had issued, the thinly veiled warnings, they now seemed like the pathetic bluster of a child. He had just tried to intimidate the wife of Alexander Thorne. The sheer, terrifying audacity of it made his stomach churn. The principal's office was exactly as Alara had imagined, an expansive space designed to impress, yet radiating an unsettling chill. A large mahogany desk, polished to a mirror sheen, dominated the room, behind which sat Mrs. Albright, the principal. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her tailored suit impeccable, and her expression as unyielding as the marble bust of some forgotten scholar perched on a nearby pedestal. Beside her, perched on the edge of a visitor's chair, was Ms. Jenkins, Lily's art teacher. Ms. Jenkins was younger, her demeanor less overtly stern than Mrs. Albright's, but her smile held a saccharine quality that Alara instantly distrusted. It was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, which instead darted over Alara's simple dress with a faint, almost imperceptible curl of her lip. Mrs. Preston, whose diamond earrings now seemed to mock her, felt a wave of nausea. Her carefully cultivated image, her social standing, her entire sense of superiority, felt like it was dissolving into thin air. She had openly sneered at Alara, belittled her, and demanded to speak to her real authority. And now, that authority stood before them, a silent, imposing figure radiating a power that made her own wealth seem like pocket change. The thought of the social repercussions, the whispers that would spread through their elite circles, the inevitable ostracization, sent a jolt of pure panic through her. "Mrs. Hayes!" Mrs. Albright began, her voice a low, perfectly modulated tone that managed to convey authority and polite disinterest all at once. She didn't invite Alara to sit, merely gestured vaguely to the empty chair opposite the desk, as if Alara's presence was an inconvenience to be tolerated. "Thank you for coming in so promptly." Alara, however, remained perfectly serene amidst the chaos she had orchestrated. She watched their faces, the rapid succession of emotions playing out: shock, fear, dawning realization, and finally, abject terror. A quiet satisfaction settled deep within her. This was not about revenge, not truly. It was about justice for Lily, and a profound, undeniable validation of her own worth, which they had so carelessly dismissed. She met Alexander's intense gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He had understood, he had come, and he had, with a single word, shattered their carefully constructed reality. Alara took the seat, her back straight, her hands clasped calmly in her lap. She met Mrs. Albright's gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. "It's about Lily, isn't it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor of anxiety beneath her composure. She was quite upset yesterday. Alexander, having delivered his powerful declaration, now stood perfectly still, allowing the shock to fully permeate the room. He took a moment to observe each of their reactions, his eyes sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. He saw Mrs. Albright's professional mask shatter, Ms. Jenkins's fear, and the Prestons' abject horror. He saw the full extent of their arrogance, their prejudice, and their casual cruelty towards his wife and daughter. The silence stretched, heavy and pregnant with their unspoken apologies and frantic recalculations. Ms. Jenkins cleared her throat, a delicate, almost theatrical sound. "Yes, well, upset is certainly one way to put it. Mrs. Hayes, Lily was involved in an unfortunate incident during art class. A rather valuable display piece was damaged." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air, her gaze lingering on Alara's unadorned hands. The Preston's daughter, Tiffany, was quite distressed. The air conditioning continued its soft hum, a stark contrast to the roaring silence in the room. The marble bust on the pedestal seemed to stare with an ancient, knowing gaze, as if it had witnessed countless such displays of human folly. The polished mahogany desk, once a symbol of Mrs. Albright's authority, now seemed to reflect their collective shame. Alara felt a flicker of annoyance. Lily told me her side of the story. She said Tiffany and her friends were teasing her, and that Tiffany pushed her, causing the accident. This profound silence was more potent than any shout, more devastating than any argument. It was the moment of reckoning, the instant when the true power dynamics were irrevocably revealed. They had demanded real authority. They had mocked Alara, and now they were utterly, terrifyingly exposed. The game was over, and they had lost before they even knew they were playing against a force of nature. Mrs. Albright's lips thinned. "Mrs. Hayes, we have Tiffany's account, and that of several other students. They all corroborate that Lily was being disruptive and, in a fit of pique, intentionally damaged the sculpture." Her tone was dismissive, as if Alara's version of events was not even worth considering. Northwood Academy prides itself on fostering a respectful and disciplined environment. Such behavior is simply unacceptable. The stunned silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until Alexander finally broke it. His voice, when it came, was no longer the booming declaration of wife, but a calm, measured tone that somehow carried even more authority. It was the voice of a man accustomed to controlling narratives, to dissecting arguments, and to leading with absolute certainty. "But Lily isn't disruptive," Alara insisted, her voice gaining a touch of urgency. "She's a quiet child, very focused on her art. She wouldn't intentionally damage anything, especially not someone else's work." She leaned forward slightly, trying to convey the depth of her conviction. "There must be a misunderstanding. Perhaps if we spoke to Lily again, or looked at the security footage." "Good morning," Alexander began, his gaze sweeping over Mrs. Albright, Ms. Jenkins, and then settling with chilling intensity on the Prestons. "I understand there's been an incident concerning my daughter, Lily Hayes, and my wife, Alara Hayes." He used their full names, a subtle but powerful assertion of their identity and his connection to them. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Mrs. Albright. "And I also understand that my wife, who is perfectly capable of representing our family, was deemed to lack real authority in this institution." Ms. Jenkins let out a soft, almost pitying sigh. "Mrs. Hayes, with all due respect, we've handled these matters for years. Children can be less than truthful when faced with consequences. And while we appreciate a parent's natural inclination to defend their child, sometimes one must recognize the gravity of the situation." Her eyes, though still holding that faint judgmental glint, now seemed to pity Ilara's perceived naivety. "This is a very prestigious institution. Our parents expect a certain caliber of student and a certain level of understanding from their families." Mrs. Albright visibly flinched, her face paling further. "Mr. Thorne, Alexander, she stammered, scrambling for words, her usual polished demeanor completely gone. "There seems to have been a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea." The words hung in the air, laced with an unspoken insinuation. Understanding meant understanding your place. Influence meant having the connections, the wealth, the social standing to navigate Northwood's intricate ecosystem. And Alara, in her simple dress and quiet demeanor, clearly lacked both. They weren't just dismissing Lily's concerns. They were subtly belittling Alara, implying she was out of her depth, incapable of grasping the unspoken rules of their elite world. "No idea," Alexander interrupted, his voice still calm, but with an edge of steel that cut through her weak excuse. "No idea that a parent, regardless of their outward appearance, deserves respect and a fair hearing. No idea that a child's distress should be investigated thoroughly, rather than dismissed based on the social standing of other parents." He paused, letting the questions hang in the air, rhetorical and damning. Alara felt a slow burn of anger begin to simmer beneath her calm exterior. It wasn't just about Lily anymore. It was about the casual condescension, the assumption that her appearance dictated her worth, her intelligence, her very right to advocate for her child. She imagined the conversations that must have taken place before she arrived. "Oh, it's just Lily Hayes's mother. She seems simple. We can handle her." He then turned his full attention to the Prestons, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Mr. Preston, who moments ago had been so full of bluster, now looked like a deflated balloon. Mrs. Preston was practically cowering behind him. "My understanding is quite clear. Ms. Jenkins, Alara said, her voice dropping a fraction, the quietness now carrying a subtle edge. My understanding is that my daughter, a child who has never had a behavioral issue, is being unfairly accused, and her distress is being dismissed. My understanding is that perhaps, in an institution that prides itself on caliber, a thorough investigation might be more appropriate than a swift judgment based on one-sided accounts. And you, Alexander continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming even more dangerous in its quiet precision. Mr. and Mrs. Preston, I believe you made some rather disparaging remarks about my wife's background and class. And you threatened my daughter's future at this school based on what appears to be a clear case of bullying, which you are attempting to cover up. Mrs. Albright stiffened, her gaze narrowing. Mrs. Hayes, we assure you, our judgment is based on ample evidence and the testimony of multiple students. We cannot simply disregard the accounts of other children, especially when they come from families who are deeply invested in the school's values and reputation. The unspoken words were clear families like the Prestons, who donate generously and sit on the board. Mr. Preston finally found his voice, a pathetic squeak compared to his earlier booming tone. Mr. Thorne, sir, with all due respect, we were simply concerned for our daughter. Tiffany is a sensitive child, and we have a long-standing relationship with Northwood. Alara felt the weight of their combined dismissal, the subtle but undeniable message that she was an outsider, her voice unimportant. They were not listening to her, they were merely waiting for her to accept their predetermined narrative. The air in the office grew heavy with unspoken class distinctions, with the subtle power plays that define this world. Alara knew, with a sinking feeling, that this was just the beginning. They had no intention of seeing her as anything more than the quiet, unassuming mother they perceived her to be. And that, she realized, was their first mistake. Your long-standing relationship does not grant you immunity from basic decency or the truth. Mr. Preston, Alexander cut him off, his voice unwavering. My wife informed me that your daughter, Tiffany, pushed Lily, causing the damage to the art project. She also mentioned weeks of ongoing teasing and bullying. Is that correct? Alara. He turned to Alara, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. An act of profound respect and solidarity, just as the silence in the principal's office stretched taut with Alara's simmering indignation. The door swung open with a theatrical flourish. Standing there, framed by the polished wood, were Mr. and Mrs. Preston. They didn't walk in so much as they swept in, an undeniable aura of self-importance preceding them. Mrs. Preston, a woman whose perfectly coiffed blonde hair seemed to defy gravity and whose diamond earrings sparkled with aggressive brilliance, wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Alara's car. Mr. Preston, equally immaculate in a crisp, expensive suit, carried himself with the puffed-up confidence of a man who rarely heard the word no. Alara, empowered by his unwavering support, met his gaze and nodded. Her voice, though still quiet, was now infused with a newfound confidence. Yes, Alexander. And when I tried to explain, Ms. Jenkins suggested Lily was struggling to adapt to the school's social dynamics, implying her background was the issue. Mrs. Albright then demanded someone with real authority to speak on Lily's behalf. Ah, the Prestons, Mrs. Albright said, her severe expression softening into a practiced, almost fawning smile. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. She gestured to the two empty chairs beside Alara, a clear indication of where the power dynamics lay. Alara felt a fresh wave of irritation. They were already being treated as allies, while she was the problem to be managed. Alexander turned back to the principal and teacher, his eyes colder than Arctic ice. So, let me be clear. My wife, Alara Hayes, is not just a parent. She is a woman of exceptional intelligence and integrity. Her preference for a private, unassuming life does not diminish her authority, her capabilities, or her right to be heard. And as for real authority, I assure you, you are now speaking to it. Mrs. Preston's gaze immediately landed on Alara, raking over her simple attire with an undisguised look of disdain. Her lips curved into a thin, condescending smile. And this must be Lily's mother. I presume. Her tone implied that Alara was less an individual and more a vague, unfortunate category. He then began to systematically dismantle their arguments, not with anger, but with chillingly precise logic. Firstly, Mrs. Albright, your reliance on multiple student testimonies without a thorough, impartial investigation, or even reviewing security footage, is a dereliction of your duty. Northwood Academy purports to foster critical thinking, yet you've demonstrated a shocking lack of it in handling a simple playground dispute. Alara Hayes, Alara stated, her voice calm, refusing to rise to the bait. She offered a small, polite nod. He paused, letting his words sink in. Secondly, Ms. Jenkins, your thinly veiled classism and insinuation that a child's background dictates their behavior or ability to adapt is not only unprofessional, but deeply offensive. It speaks volumes about the culture you permit, and perhaps even encourage, within your classrooms. Mr. Preston, without even acknowledging Alara, turned directly to Mrs. Albright. So, principal, what's this all about? Tiffany was quite distressed when she came home yesterday. Something about a broken art project and a disruptive child. His voice was deep, resonant, and carried the unquestioning authority of someone used to having their version of events accepted as gospel. Finally, he addressed the Prestons, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. And to the Prestons, your behavior today has been a profound disappointment. Not only did you attempt to cover up your daughter's bullying, but you engaged in blatant classism and intimidation towards my family. Consider your association with Thorn Global Industries and any of its subsidiaries to be severed, effective immediately. Indeed, Mr. Preston, Mrs. Albright replied, her voice losing its earlier edge and becoming almost apologetic. We're just going over the incident with Mrs. Hayes. Tiffany has been very clear about what happened. Mr. Preston's eyes widened in horror. That meant lucrative contracts, potential investments, and crucial business relationships were instantly gone. The financial fallout alone would be devastating. But the blow to his reputation, the public knowledge that he had crossed Alexander Thorne, would be irreparable. His arrogance had cost him everything. Mrs. Preston scoffed, her gaze still fixed on Alara. Clear. My Tiffany is practically a saint. She wouldn't lie, and she certainly wouldn't push anyone. She's a delicate child, very sensitive. Her words were a thinly veiled attack, designed to paint Lily as the aggressor and Tiffany as the innocent victim, despite Alara's earlier statement. Frankly, I find it hard to believe that a child from certain backgrounds would understand the value of property, especially at a school like Northwood. Mrs. Preston, now openly weeping, buried her face in her hands. Their social standing, their wealth, their carefully constructed world, it was all collapsing. They had tried to exert power, and in doing so, had provoked a force they couldn't possibly comprehend. Alara's jaw tightened. The insult was blatant, a direct jab at her perceived social standing and, by extension, Lily's character. They weren't just siding with their child, they were actively dismissing Lily's feelings and character based on Alara's appearance. It was an ugly, blatant display of classism. Alara watched it all unfold, a quiet satisfaction settling in her heart. This wasn't about revenge, but about justice. The Prestons' humiliation was complete, their influence shattered. The school, once a bastion of elitism, was being forced to confront its own biases. Mrs. Albright and Miss Jenkins, who had so readily dismissed her, were now facing the harsh consequences of their actions. The fallout was immediate, severe, and undeniably deserved. The quiet woman they had underestimated had, with the support of her formidable husband, brought their world crashing down, paving the way for a much-needed reckoning. My daughter is well aware of the value of property. Mrs. Preston, Alara said, her voice still low, but with an undercurrent of steel. And she is also aware of the value of truth. Lily told me she was being teased, and that Tiffany pushed her. Accidents happen, but bullying is a choice. Alexander's unwavering defense had systematically dismantled the principal's authority and the Prestons' arrogance, leaving them exposed and humiliated. The air in the office, once thick with their condescension, now hummed with their palpable fear. But Alexander wasn't finished, and neither was Alara. Empowered by his steadfast support, a newfound confidence settled over her. allowing her own quiet strength to emerge. Mr. Preston finally turned his full attention to Alara, his eyes cold and dismissive. Look, Mrs. Hayes, we're not here for a playground squabble. Our daughter is an exemplary student. She's never been in trouble. And frankly, we have a very good relationship with this school. He paused, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. We're not going to let some misunderstanding jeopardize Tiffany's record or Northwood's reputation. Perhaps you should teach your daughter to play nicely with others and to respect school property. Alexander turned back to Mrs. Albright, his voice still calm, but with an undeniable edge. Now, Mrs. Albright, let's address the evidence you so readily accepted. You mentioned multiple student testimonies. Can you confirm if these testimonies were taken individually, without the presence of other students? Or if they were influenced by Tiffany Preston's narrative? His gaze was piercing, demanding an honest answer. The audacity of it took Alara's breath away for a moment. They were not only dismissing Lily's account but actively blaming her, twisting the narrative to suit their own convenience and protect their daughter's pristine image. They were flaunting their wealth and connections, making it abundantly clear that they believed Alara to be beneath them, her words insignificant. Mrs. Albright stammered. Well, they were taken in a group setting, mostly. For efficiency. Her voice was barely a whisper. My daughter was the one who came home crying, Alara countered, her voice now firm, unwilling to back down. And she was crying because she was hurt. Not just physically, but emotionally. Tiffany and her friends have been teasing her for weeks. This wasn't an isolated incident. Before Alexander could press further, Alara spoke, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the principal's weak excuse. And were any of those multiple students the ones who were actively teasing Lily before the incident? Ms. Jenkins. Her question was directed at the art teacher, whose face had gone even paler. Alara's eyes, though gentle, held a sharp, knowing glint. Lily mentioned that Tiffany's friends, Chloe and Isabella, were the ones encouraging her to push. Did their testimonies reflect that? Ms. Jenkins interjected, her saccharine smile returning, though now laced with an edge of exasperation. Mrs. Hayes, we understand your concern, but we simply cannot have such accusations thrown around without substantial proof. Tiffany is a popular student, well-liked by her peers. Lily, on the other hand, is a little more reserved. Perhaps she misinterpreted the situation. Ms. Jenkins swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously between Alara and Alexander. I don't recall the specifics, Mrs. Hayes. We focused on the damage to the sculpture. Her attempt to deflect was transparent. Misinterpreted being pushed, Alara asked, her voice rising slightly, a flicker of her simmering anger finally breaking through. Misinterpreted her art project being deliberately broken after she was pushed. Precisely, Alara continued, her voice gaining a quiet authority that captivated everyone in the room. She wasn't shouting, wasn't grandstanding, but her words carried the weight of undeniable truth. The focus was on the damage, not the instigation, and certainly not on the bullying that led to it. Lily told me Tiffany had been taking her art supplies, hiding her drawings, and making fun of her quiet nature for weeks. This incident was the culmination of ongoing harassment. Mrs. Preston let out an exasperated sigh. Honestly, Principal Albright, this is getting ridiculous. We have multiple witnesses. Tiffany's a good girl. This other child is clearly the problem. Perhaps she's just looking for attention. She turned back to Alara, her eyes narrowing. You know, Mrs. Hayes, some parents just don't understand the standards here. Northwood Academy isn't just any school. We expect a certain level of decorum, a certain level of class from our families. The word class dripped with condescension, a direct hit at Alara's perceived lack of it. She turned slightly, addressing the Prestons directly, her gaze firm. Mrs. Preston, you mentioned Tiffany is sensitive. Is she sensitive enough to understand the impact of her actions on another child, or is her sensitivity only relevant when it comes to her own comfort and reputation? Alara's tone was not accusatory, but rather a calm, pointed challenge that left no room for their usual evasions. Mr. Preston leaned forward, his voice dropping, taking on a more menacing tone. Let's be clear. Mrs. Hayes, we don't want any further trouble. We're prepared to ensure this matter is resolved swiftly and quietly. But if this escalates, if our daughter's name is dragged through the mud, we will take all necessary steps to protect her. And that includes ensuring that certain elements that disrupt the school's harmony are dealt with. His gaze was pointed, unwavering, a thinly veiled threat that implied Alara and Lily would face consequences if she didn't back down. Mr. Preston, completely unnerved by Alara's quiet intelligence, tried to interject. Now, hold on, Mrs. Hayes. You're making accusations. Alara felt the full weight of their combined intimidation. They were not just arrogant, they were ruthless. They were using their wealth and influence as a weapon, attempting to crush her and Lily underfoot. The air in the office was thick with their condescension, their absolute certainty that they held all the cards. They believed her to be insignificant, easily dismissed, and entirely beneath them. And in that moment, a cold, quiet resolve settled deep within Alara. They had pushed her too far. They had underestimated her. And they had no idea who they were truly dealing with. The game, she realized, was about to change. I'm stating facts, Mr. Preston, Alara calmly countered, her eyes unwavering. Facts that a thorough and impartial investigation would have uncovered. Facts that were dismissed because of assumptions about my background and my perceived lack of authority. She gestured subtly towards her simple phone still resting on the desk. Perhaps if the school had bothered to truly listen, or to verify accounts beyond those of its most influential donors, we wouldn't be having this discussion. The Prestons' thinly veiled threats hung in the air, a suffocating blanket of arrogance and power. Alara felt the full force of their combined assault, a calculated effort to belittle and dismiss her. Mrs. Albright, sensing the Prestons' unwavering resolve and eager to appease her influential donors, cleared her throat, her gaze now fixed entirely on Alara, devoid of any pretense of impartiality. Mrs. Albright looked utterly defeated. Alara wasn't just defending her daughter. She was exposing the systemic flaws, the favoritism, and the superficiality that permeated Northwood Academy. Her quiet intelligence, her deep understanding of the situation, and her ability to articulate the precise points of failure shone through, revealing a sharp, analytical mind that had been completely underestimated. Mrs. Hayes, Mrs. Albright began, her voice taking on a tone of finality, as if the discussion were already concluded. While we appreciate your passion for your daughter, the evidence, as presented by Tiffany and her classmates, is quite compelling. We simply cannot ignore the testimonies of multiple students. She paused, her eyes sweeping over Alara's simple attire once more, a subtle, almost imperceptible judgment. Northwood Academy maintains very high standards, not just academically, but in terms of student conduct and family engagement. Alexander watched Alara with a profound sense of pride. This was the woman he loved, brilliant, resilient, and utterly unwavering in her convictions. He had known her capabilities, but seeing her calmly dismantle their prejudiced arguments, armed only with truth and quiet dignity, was a sight to behold. He had provided the initial shock, the undeniable power. But Alara was now delivering the precise, surgical strikes that exposed their hypocrisy. Ms. Jenkins chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. It's truly a shame. Mrs. Hayes, Lily is a bright child, but perhaps she's struggling to adapt to the social dynamics of a school like ours. Sometimes, children from different backgrounds find it challenging to integrate. The words were a thinly veiled jab, implying that Lily's supposed misbehavior was a direct result of Alara's perceived lack of social standing and influence. So, Mrs. Albright, Alexander interjected, his voice returning to its commanding tone, now backed by Alara's compelling factual corrections. It seems your evidence is based on biased accounts, a lack of proper procedure, and a clear disregard for the well-being of a student who isn't from a significant family. This is not just a misunderstanding, it's a systemic failure, and it's a failure that will have significant consequences. Alara's hands, clasped tightly in her lap, began to tremble almost imperceptibly. She felt a surge of raw, protective fury. They weren't just attacking her, they were attacking Lily, painting her as an outsider, a problem child, simply because her mother didn't fit their narrow, elitist mold. The injustice of it burned, a hot coal in her stomach. Ms. Jenkins, overwhelmed, finally spoke, her voice trembling. Mrs. Hayes, I apologize. I truly did not mean to imply anything about your background. I was just trying to maintain order. My daughter is not struggling to adapt, Alara stated, her voice low and steady, a remarkable feat given the storm raging inside her. She is being bullied. And instead of investigating that, you are blaming the victim and dismissing her mother based on what, my clothes, my car, my lack of a fancy title. Her eyes flashed with a quiet defiance that surprised even herself. Alara simply nodded, her expression neutral. She knew the apology was born of fear, not genuine remorse, but the acknowledgement was there. The Prestons remained silent, their faces etched with a bitter, defeated fury. Alara had not just stood her ground, she had, with quiet grace and undeniable intellect, turned the tables completely, revealing her true depth and competence to the now chastened school staff. The unassuming mother had just become the most formidable presence in the room. Mr. Preston let out a short, sharp laugh, a dismissive sound that grated on Alara's nerves. Now, Mrs. Hayes, let's not get emotional. This isn't about your personal circumstances. This is about school policy and ensuring a harmonious environment for all students, especially those who contribute significantly to the school's prestige. He leaned back in his chair, a smug smirk playing on his lips, clearly enjoying Alara's discomfort. The atmosphere in the principal's office had shifted completely. The Prestons were silent, defeated. Mrs. Albright and Miss Jenkins were visibly shaken, their authority shattered. Alexander, having established his undeniable presence, now stood beside Alara, his hand gently resting on the small of her back, a silent testament to their unbreakable bond. Alara, her quiet strength fully emerged, had exposed the school's prejudice and the Prestons' bullying with calm precision, but there was a deeper reason for her unassuming demeanor, a past that shaped her fierce desire for privacy. Mrs. Preston nodded in agreement, her diamond earrings catching the light as she moved. Exactly. We simply want this resolved. Tiffany is very sensitive, and this whole ordeal has been quite upsetting for her. We expect Northwood to uphold its values and protect its students. Her gaze was unwavering, a silent demand that Alara back down. As the immediate tension began to subside, a flicker of a memory passed through Alara's mind, a brief, poignant flashback to a life she had deliberately left behind. It was a life of flashing cameras, relentless scrutiny, and the suffocating weight of public expectation. Mrs. Albright, seeing her opportunity to deliver the final, crushing blow, straightened in her chair. Her voice became even more formal, more detached, as if reciting a pre-written statement. Given the seriousness of the incident, Mrs. Hayes, and the differing accounts, we feel it's imperative to have a comprehensive discussion about Lily's future at Northwood. This requires a level of engagement that, frankly, we haven't seen years ago. Before Alexander, Alara had been Eleanor Vance, a brilliant and ambitious young woman who had co-founded a groundbreaking tech startup. She had poured her heart and soul into it, working tirelessly, her innovative ideas propelling the company to dizzying heights. She had been the face of the company, celebrated in tech magazines, lauded as a visionary. But with the accolades came the relentless public eye, the constant demands on her time, and the insidious whispers of jealousy. Alara's heart pounded. She knew what was coming. The subtle hints, the veiled insults, the dismissive tones. It all led to this. Her business partner, a man she had trusted implicitly, had seen her success not as a shared triumph, but as a personal slight. He had orchestrated a brutal betrayal, a calculated move to push her out, to claim all the credit and the immense fortune for himself. The corporate battle had been ugly, played out in the media, dissecting her every move, questioning her competence, her integrity, even her sanity. The public, fickle and hungry for drama, had devoured every scandalous detail. For such a significant matter, Mrs. Albright continued, her gaze unwavering, one that could potentially impact Lily's enrollment. We need to speak with her parents, both parents, or if that's not possible, someone with real authority, someone who truly understands the gravity of these situations and can make decisions that align with Northwood's expectations. Alara remembered the crushing weight of the betrayal, not just of her partner, but of the very public that had once adored her. The headlines had been merciless, the accusations baseless but damaging. She had fought back, of course, with every ounce of her formidable intellect, but the emotional toll had been immense. When the dust finally settled, she had won the legal battle, clearing her name and securing a significant settlement. But she had lost something far more precious: her peace, her trust in the public eye, and her desire for any kind of spotlight. The words hung in the air, a condescending dismissal that cut deeper than any direct insult. Her parents, someone with real authority. It was a deliberate, calculated jab, implying that Alara, alone, was insufficient, incapable, and ultimately irrelevant. They were telling her, without saying it directly, that she wasn't good enough, that her voice didn't matter, and that her perceived lack of status rendered her powerless in their elite world. She had walked away from it all, from the tech world, from the public life, from the very name, Eleanor Vance. She had sought anonymity, a quiet existence where she could heal and, eventually, build a new life. Far from the glare of judgment and betrayal, she had reinvented herself as Alara Hayes, a name that carried no baggage, no expectations, no history of public scrutiny. A profound silence descended upon the office, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. Alara felt a strange mix of humiliation and a quiet, simmering anger that had now reached a boiling point. Her initial anxiety had transformed into a cold, hard resolve. They had judged her based on appearances, dismissed her concerns, and now they were demanding a show of power she hadn't intended to reveal. But they had pushed her too far. Far, far, too far. When Alexander Thorne, already a rising star in the global business world, had met her years later, he hadn't known about Eleanor Vance. He had simply been captivated by Alara Hayes, her quiet intelligence, her genuine kindness, her fierce devotion to the small, private world she had built. He had fallen in love with the woman beneath the unassuming exterior, the one who found joy in simple pleasures, who cherished genuine connection over superficial status. And when she had, much later, cautiously revealed her past, Alexander had listened with profound understanding and unwavering respect. He had seen the scars, understood the trauma, and cherished her desire for privacy, never once pushing her back into the limelight. He loved Alara, the true self she had carefully cultivated. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of Alara's lips. It wasn't a pleasant smile, but one of quiet, dangerous determination. The Prestons and the school staff watched her, smug and confident in their victory, completely unaware of the seismic shift that was about to occur. They had asked for real authority. They were about to get it, and it wouldn't be anything like what they expected. This unspoken history, this quiet understanding between them, was the foundation of their bond. It explained why Alara, a woman of immense capability and a past that could command headlines, chose to dress simply, drive a modest car, and live a life that allowed her to blend seamlessly into the background. It was a shield, a sanctuary, built to protect herself, and, more importantly, to protect Lily from the very public scrutiny and potential betrayal that had once almost destroyed her. The silence in the principal's office was thick, heavy with the Prestons' smug satisfaction and the school staff's condescending triumph. They watched Alara, expecting to see defeat, perhaps a tear, or at least a meek concession. But what they saw instead was a subtle shift in her demeanor, a quiet hardening of her gaze that went unnoticed by their self-absorbed eyes. The slow, almost imperceptible smile that touched Alara's lips was not one of amusement, but of quiet, dangerous determination. It was the smile of a woman who had been pushed too far, a woman who had decided to reveal a hidden hand. Now, in the principal's office, as the Prestons and school staff stared at her with a dawning, terrified realization of who she truly was, Alara felt a strange sense of vindication. They had judged her on the very superficiality she had sought to escape. They had dismissed her for the very quietness she had embraced. But in doing so, they had inadvertently forced her to reveal the true depth of her strength and the formidable power of the man who stood by her side, a man who loved her for who she was, not for what she appeared to be. The past, though painful, had forged a resilience within her that was now undeniable. With a deliberate slowness that was almost theatrical, Alara reached into her simple canvas tote bag. Her movements were calm, unhurried. A stark contrast to the frantic energy that usually filled such tense confrontations. She pulled out her phone. It was an older model, a practical, no-frills device that looked utterly out of place in the hands of a parent at Northwood Academy, where the latest, most expensive smartphones were practically a uniform accessory. The revelation of Alara's true identity and the quiet power of Alexander Thorne had not merely shifted the atmosphere in the principal's office, it had detonated it. The Prestons, who had strutted in with such self-assured arrogance, were now utterly humiliated, their faces a ghastly shade of white. Their carefully constructed facade of influence and superiority had not just crumbled, it had imploded under the weight of Alexander's scrutiny and Alara's quiet, undeniable dignity. Mrs. Preston let out a soft, derisive snort, exchanging an amused glance with Ms. Jenkins. Mr. Preston's lips curled into a faint smirk. They clearly thought she was calling some insignificant relative, perhaps a struggling older sister or a well-meaning but powerless friend, someone who would only further highlight her lack of real authority. The unspoken message was clear. Who could she possibly call? That would matter here. Mr. Preston, who had threatened Alara with legal action and school repercussions, now looked like a man who had seen a ghost. His eyes darted frantically between Alexander and Alara, a desperate, pathetic plea for mercy forming on his lips. But no words came out. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that his casual threats had just signed his own professional and social death warrant. Alexander Thorne was not a man to be trifled with, and certainly not a man whose wife and child could be insulted with impunity. The thought of Thorne Global Industries, with its vast legal and financial resources, turning its attention to his comparatively small empire, sent a cold dread through him. Alara ignored their silent mockery, her fingers, steady and precise, punched in a number she knew by heart, a sequence of digits that connected her to a world they couldn't even begin to fathom. The faint, almost imperceptible click of the buttons was the only sound in the room, amplifying the tension. She held the phone to her ear, her eyes now cold and unwavering, fixed on Mrs. Albright. Mrs. Preston, her diamond earrings suddenly seeming garish and cheap, was trembling uncontrollably. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to droop, her designer suit suddenly ill-fitting. The social circles she so desperately clung to would, she knew, swiftly and brutally cast her out. The whispers would begin immediately. Did you hear about the Prestons? They insulted Alexander Thorne's wife. His wife. The thought of becoming a pariah in the very society she so desperately tried to impress was a torment far worse than any financial loss. Her smug confidence had dissolved into abject terror and shame. The principal, still basking in her perceived victory, raised an eyebrow, a hint of impatience in her expression. Mrs. Hayes, if you're attempting to call someone to mediate, I assure you, this matter is best handled directly with the school administration. Her tone was dismissive, as if Alara's attempt was a futile, childish gesture. Mrs. Albright, the principal, looked utterly broken. Her severe bun seemed to sag. Her impeccable suit suddenly rumpled. She knew her career at Northwood Academy, and likely her entire professional reputation in the elite private school circuit, was over. Alexander Thorne was not just a donor, he was a force, and she had, in her eagerness to appease the Prestons and dismiss Alara, committed a cardinal sin in his eyes. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fear and regret. Alara said nothing. She simply waited, her gaze unwavering. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a deep, resonant voice answered, a voice that, even through the phone's modest speaker, carried an undeniable aura of power and urgency. Mrs. Albright. Alexander's voice cut through the silence, sharp and decisive, leaving no room for negotiation. Effective immediately, I expect a full, comprehensive, and impartial investigation into the bullying of Lily Hayes. I expect a review of all current school policies regarding student conduct, parent communication, and the handling of complaints. And I expect a public apology, not just to my wife and daughter, but to any other families who have been dismissed or marginalized due to their perceived lack of authority or background. Alara, is everything all right? Why are you calling me from Lily's school? The voice was laced with immediate concern, a protective edge that was unmistakable. He paused, his gaze hardening. Furthermore, given the clear demonstration of bias and unprofessional conduct, I recommend that both you, Mrs. Albright and Ms. Jenkins, tender your resignations by the end of the day. Should you choose not to, I assure you, the Board of Trustees will be receiving a full report of this morning's events, along with a detailed account of the systemic issues I have observed. And given my significant influence within the educational philanthropic sector, I can guarantee that your future employment prospects in any reputable institution will be severely limited. The Prestons exchanged another amused glance. See, just some worried relative, probably a small-time businessman. If that, they settled back in their chairs, ready to enjoy the show of Alara's inevitable capitulation. Ms. Jenkins gasped, a small, choked sob escaping her lips. Her career, built on years of careful networking and adherence to Northwood's unspoken rules, was crashing down around her. Alara's voice, when she spoke, was calm, almost deceptively so. Alexander, she began, using his first name, a familiarity that surprised no one in the room, given their assumptions about her social circle. I'm in Principal Albright's office. It seems there's been an incident with Lily, and they're requesting that I bring in someone with real authority to discuss her future at Northwood. Her tone was flat, devoid of emotion, but the words themselves were a subtle, devastating indictment of the condescension she had endured. As for the Prestons, Alexander continued, his voice dropping to a chillingly quiet tone that was far more menacing than any shout. Your behavior today has been a profound disappointment. Not only did you attempt to cover up your daughter's bullying, but you engaged in blatant classism and intimidation towards my family. Consider your association with Thorn Global Industries and any of its subsidiaries to be severed, effective immediately. A beat of silence stretched on the other end of the line, a silence that felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken meaning. Then, the voice on the phone, Alexander's voice, hardened. It lost its initial concern and took on an edge of steel, a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate even through the air. They said what the question was not asked for clarification, but as a statement of disbelief, a challenge. Mr. Preston's eyes widened in horror. That meant lucrative contracts, potential investments, and crucial business relationships were instantly gone. The financial fallout alone would be devastating, but the blow to his reputation, the public knowledge that he had crossed Alexander Thorn, would be irreparable. His arrogance had cost him everything. Ilara simply repeated, someone with real authority, Alexander, they don't seem to think I fit the bill. Her eyes, still locked on Mrs. Albright, held a glint of quiet triumph. Mrs. Preston, now openly weeping, buried her face in her hands. Their social standing, their wealth, their carefully constructed world. It was all collapsing. They had tried to exert power, and in doing so, had provoked a force they couldn't possibly comprehend. On the other end, the voice grew colder, sharper, the words clipped with an icy precision. Stay exactly where you are, Ilara. Do not move, do not say another word. I'm on my way. I'll be there in 5 minutes. The line went dead. Ilara watched it all unfold, a quiet satisfaction settling in her heart. This wasn't about revenge, but about justice. The Prestons' humiliation was complete, their influence shattered. The school, once a bastion of elitism, was being forced to confront its own biases. Mrs. Albright and Ms. Jenkins, who had so readily dismissed her, were now facing the harsh consequences of their actions. The fallout was immediate, severe, and undeniably deserved. The quiet woman they had underestimated had, with the support of her formidable husband, brought their world crashing down, paving the way for a much-needed reckoning. Ilara slowly lowered the phone, placing it gently on the principal's polished desk. She looked up, meeting Mrs. Albright's gaze, then Ms. Jenkins's, and finally, the smug, self-satisfied faces of the Prestons. Her expression was unreadable, but the quiet determination in her eyes was unmistakable. With the Prestons cowering in humiliated silence, and the principal and art teacher reeling from Alexander's decisive pronouncements, the focus of the meeting finally, unequivocally, shifted to Lily. The air, though still thick with the residue of shattered power, now held a faint glimmer of hope, a promise of justice finally being served. He's on his way, Ilara stated, her voice calm, almost serene. "He said he'll be here in 5 minutes." Alexander, his voice softening from its earlier steel, turned to Mrs. Albright. "Now, regarding Lily's situation, I expect a full and immediate resolution. This includes ensuring that Tiffany Preston and any other students involved in bullying are held accountable through appropriate disciplinary measures. More importantly, I expect a clear plan for Lily's safety and emotional well-being within this school, free from any further harassment or prejudice." The Prestons scoffed again, a little less confidently this time. Mrs. Albright frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm not sure who you've called, but I assure you, this matter will be handled according to school policy, regardless of who you bring in." Her tone was still dismissive, but there was a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her voice, a tiny crack in her otherwise unyielding facade. Perhaps it was the sheer force of the voice on the other end of the phone, or perhaps it was the unsettling calm in Alira's eyes. Mrs. Albright, her voice trembling, nodded frantically. "Yes, Mr. Thorne, absolutely. We will launch a full investigation immediately. Tiffany will be suspended, and we will implement a zero-tolerance policy for bullying. Lily will be moved to a different art class, and we will assign a counselor to ensure her comfort and happiness. We deeply regret the distress caused to Lily and your family." Her words were laced with desperation, a frantic attempt to salvage anything from the wreckage of her career. They had asked for real authority. Alara had called it. And the storm, she knew, was just beginning to gather on the horizon. The next 5 minutes would change everything. The Prestons and the school staff, still trapped in their bubble of arrogance, had no idea the true magnitude of the force that was about to descend upon Northwood Academy. They were about to learn that underestimating Alara Hayes was the gravest mistake they could ever make. Alexander's gaze remained firm. "Regret is a start. Action is what matters. I expect a detailed report on these measures on my desk by tomorrow morning." The 5 minutes that followed Alara's pronouncement stretched into an eternity, each second thick with unspoken tension. The Prestons, though still outwardly confident, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier smirks faltering slightly under Alara's unwavering gaze. Mrs. Albright kept glancing at her watch, a faint line of worry appearing between her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. Ms. Jenkins nervously adjusted her glasses. A seed of doubt, however tiny, had been planted. Just then, a quiet knock came at the principal's door. It was the school counselor, Mrs. Davies, a kind-faced woman whom Alara had always found to be genuinely compassionate. She had been asked to bring Lily to the office, unaware of the dramatic turn the meeting had taken. Then, a low rumble vibrated through the very foundations of the school building. It wasn't the sound of a typical parent's sedan or SUV pulling into the parking lot. This was the deep, powerful purr of a high-performance engine, a sound usually associated with exclusive car shows or the private garages of the ultra-wealthy. The sound grew louder, closer, until it culminated in a soft, almost imperceptible hiss as a sleek, obsidian-black luxury car glided to a silent halt directly outside the principal's office window. It was a vehicle that screamed understated power, its dark, tinted windows offering no hint of its occupant. Lily walked in, her small hand clutching Mrs. Davies's. Her eyes, usually so bright, were still a little wary, a shadow of the previous day's upset lingering. She looked at her mother, then at the stern faces of the adults, her brow furrowed with apprehension. A few curious glances were exchanged among the school staff in the outer office. The secretary, who had initially dismissed Alara, peered through the blinds, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of the expensive vehicle. It was an anomaly in the usual parade of luxury cars. This one felt different, more exclusive, almost intimidating in its quiet grandeur. Alara's heart swelled with love and fierce protectiveness. She immediately knelt down, opening her arms. "Lily-bug," she whispered, her voice soft and reassuring. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, impeccably dressed, but not in a way that screamed for attention. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his white shirt crisp, but there were no flashy ties, no ostentatious watches, no designer logos boldly displayed. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his expression as he walked towards the school entrance was one of focused intensity, a subtle urgency in his stride. This was Alexander, Alara's husband. Lily rushed into her mother's embrace, burying her face in Alara's shoulder. Alara held her tight, stroking her hair, murmuring comforting words. "It's okay, sweetie. Everything's going to be all right now." As he entered the school, his presence was immediately noticeable. He didn't stride in with overt arrogance like the Prestons. Instead, he moved with an effortless grace and an innate authority that seemed to quiet the bustling hallway. Students and teachers alike unconsciously made way for him, sensing a gravitas that transcended mere wealth, yet because he wasn't overtly flashy, and because his face wasn't plastered on every local billboard, the school staff, particularly Mrs. Albright and Ms. Jenkins, didn't immediately recognize him. They were accustomed to recognizing wealth by its loud pronouncements, not its quiet power. Alexander knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on Lily's back. "That's right, princess," he said, his voice warm and steady. "Mommy and Daddy are here, and we've made sure that no one will ever bother you again." The secretary, flustered by his imposing yet understated presence, stammered, "Sir, may I help you?" Lily looked up, her eyes wide, first at her mother, then at her father. She saw the unwavering unity in their expressions, the quiet strength that radiated from them both. She saw the fear in the faces of the Prestons, who now looked away in shame, and the defeated slump of Mrs. Albright and Ms. Jenkins. The unspoken message was clear: her parents, together, were an unshakable force. Alexander didn't break stride. His eyes, sharp and discerning, scanned the office area, clearly looking for something, or someone. "I'm here for Alara Hayes," he stated, his voice deep and calm, yet carrying an undeniable undercurrent of urgency that brooked no argument. "They won't tease me anymore?" Lily asked, her voice small, almost hopeful. Inside the principal's office, the occupants heard the low rumble of his voice. Mrs. Albright, still slightly unnerved by the expensive car, assumed it was perhaps a distant relative, or maybe even a lawyer Alara had managed to scrape together. She still hadn't connected the dots, still hadn't imagined the true identity of the man who had just arrived. Alara smiled, pressing a kiss to Lily's forehead. "No, sweetie, and if anyone ever tries, you tell us immediately. We'll always be here to protect you. It seems your authority figure has arrived." "Mrs. Hayes," Mrs. Albright said, a hint of patronizing amusement back in her tone. She straightened her suit, ready to deliver another condescending lecture, this time to a male relative whom she presumed would be equally out of his depth. "Perhaps we can finally get this matter resolved," Alexander added, "and the school is going to make sure that bullying is never tolerated here again. They're going to make sure every child feels safe and respected." The Prestons exchanged knowing glances, a silent agreement that this was likely just another desperate, futile attempt by Alara to assert some form of influence she clearly didn't possess. Mr. Preston even let out a small, dismissive chuckle. They anticipated a meek, apologetic man, perhaps a small business owner or a mid-level manager, easily intimidated by their status and the school's authority. Lily's eyes, as she looked at her parents, filled with a profound sense of relief and security. The fear that had clouded her young face began to recede, replaced by a dawning understanding of just how powerful her parents were, not just in their influence, but in their love and unwavering support for her. She had come home crying, feeling alone and wronged. Now, she saw her parents standing shoulder to shoulder, a formidable, united front, ensuring justice was served. Alexander, guided by an unseen force, walked directly to the principal's office door. He didn't knock, he simply reached for the handle and pushed it open. Stepping into the room, the sight of her parents, a picture of quiet strength and undeniable power, filled her with immense pride. She felt a surge of warmth, a deep sense of belonging and safety that settled deep in her heart. The family bond, already strong, was solidified even further by this crucible of adversity. Lily knew, with the certainty of a child who feels truly loved and protected, that she was safe, and that her parents would always fight for her. The air in the office immediately changed. It wasn't just the physical presence of a tall, well-built man. It was an aura, a palpable shift in the energy of the room. He didn't speak immediately. His eyes, sharp and intense, swept across the room, taking in Mrs. Albright's stern face, Miss Jenkins's nervous smile, the Prestons' arrogant postures. And finally, they landed on Alara. The resolution of Lily's school issue was swift and absolute. The Preston's daughter, Tiffany, faced immediate suspension and a mandatory counseling program. Northwood Academy, under Alexander's watchful eye, began a rapid overhaul of its anti-bullying policies, implementing stricter protocols and mandatory sensitivity training for staff. Lily's art project was not only replaced, but a special school-wide art exhibition was planned, highlighting student creativity and respect for others' work, subtly aimed at mending the school's tarnished image. Lily, now feeling secure and vindicated, blossomed even further, her bright spirit shining unhindered. She had witnessed firsthand the power of truth and the unwavering strength of her family. Alara sat there, composed, defiant, but with a subtle tension in her shoulders that only Alexander would notice. Her eyes met his, a silent communication passing between them. He saw the quiet humiliation she had endured, the subtle belittling, the dismissal of her worth. And in that moment, a cold, protective fury ignited within him. The initial unassuming air he carried vanished, replaced by an undeniable force of will. The resolution of Lily's school issue, swift and decisive, was merely the first tremor of a much larger earthquake. News of the incident, contained within the principal's office for a tense hour, began to spread like wildfire, not just within the hallowed halls of Northwood Academy, but through the intricate, gossamer-thin networks of the city's elite circles. The ripple effect was immediate and profound, revealing the true power dynamics at play and exposing the fragility of superficial status. The principal, about to speak, found her words caught in her throat. The Prestons, sensing something indefinable, something powerful, felt their smugness begin to curdle into unease. Alexander took a single and deliberate step into the room, his gaze unwavering on Alara. The stage was set. The moment of revelation, the true shock, was about to unfold. They had dismissed him as just another parent, another insignificant figure. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. It started with the school secretary, whose hushed, breathless phone calls to her contacts in other prestigious institutions quickly escalated. Then came the frantic calls from the Preston's inner circle, as the news of Mr. Preston's sudden business reversals and Mrs. Preston's social pariah status began to circulate. The story, initially about a playground dispute, transformed into a cautionary tale of epic proportions. Never underestimate the quiet ones, especially if they're married to a titan of industry. Alexander stood framed in the doorway, his presence immediately commanding, yet still subtly unassuming enough for Mrs. Albright to attempt her usual dismissive tactic. She opened her mouth, a practiced, polite, yet firm refusal already forming on her lips, ready to explain that this was a private school matter and that random authority figures couldn't simply waltz in. The Prestons, still clinging to their air of superiority, watched with thinly veiled amusement, expecting to witness another of Alara's futile attempts to assert herself. The city's most exclusive country clubs, charity boards, and private school committees buzzed with the scandal. Whispers turned into open discussions, then into pointed questions. Did you hear about the Prestons and the Thorne family? Apparently, Mrs. Thorne was the one they insulted at Northwood. The name Elara Hayes became a subject of intense, frantic Googling. The discovery of her past as Eleanor Vance, the brilliant tech visionary who had disappeared from the public eye, only added to the mystique and the shock. The woman they had dismissed as simple was, in fact, a formidable intellect in her own right, a quiet force who had deliberately chosen anonymity. But Alexander didn't wait for Mrs. Albright to speak. His eyes, which had swept the room with a CEO's practiced assessment, had locked onto Alara. He saw the quiet defiance in her posture, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the faint tremor in her clasped hands that only he would notice. He saw the lingering traces of humiliation in her eyes, a silent testament to the condescension she had endured. And in that instant, the calm, almost detached expression he had worn upon entering vanished, replaced by a raw, powerful surge of emotion. Alexander Thorne, true to his word, ensured that the detailed report on Northwood's systemic issues reached the Board of Trustees with unprecedented speed. The board, composed of figures who understood the true meaning of power and reputation, acted swiftly. Mrs. Albright and Miss Jenkins were indeed terminated. Their resignations demanded and accepted with cold efficiency. Their names, once synonymous with Northwood's prestige, were now whispered as examples of spectacular professional downfall. The school announced sweeping policy changes, a new, more inclusive admission strategy, and a renewed commitment to fostering a truly respectful environment, all under the watchful, influential eye of Alexander Thorne, a muscle in his jaw clenched. His gaze, usually cool and analytical, blazed with a fierce, protective intensity. The air in the room, already thick with unspoken judgments, suddenly crackled with an undeniable energy, a shift that even the self-absorbed Prestons couldn't ignore. The Prestons, meanwhile, faced a rapid and brutal decline. Mr. and Preston's business, already reeling from the severed ties with Thorne Global Industries, found itself strangely isolated. Deals fell through, partnerships dissolved, and former allies suddenly became unavailable. Mrs. Preston found herself uninvited from charity galas, her calls to socialites unanswered. Their wealth, once their shield and sword, now seemed to mock them. As their social standing evaporated, they had relied on perceived power, on the superficiality of their connections, and it had proven utterly worthless against genuine influence and integrity. Then, Alexander spoke, his voice, typically a controlled, measured baritone in boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations, now boomed through the principal's office, cutting through the silence like a thunderclap. It was a single word, delivered with absolute certainty, unwavering conviction, and a depth of emotion that stunned everyone into immediate, profound stillness. Alara, observing this ripple effect from her quiet vantage point, felt a profound sense of vindication, not for herself, but for the principle of fairness. She saw how true power operated, not through loud boasts or flashy displays, but through quiet conviction, unwavering loyalty, and the strategic application of influence when necessary. Alexander's support had been absolute, a testament to his deep love and respect for her. He hadn't just defended her, he had championed her, allowing her own quiet strength and intelligence to shine through, validating her choices and her worth. Wife, their partnership, once a private sanctuary, now became a symbol in the city's elite circles. Alexander Thorne, the ruthless CEO, was revealed to be fiercely protective, deeply devoted, and utterly uncompromising when it came to his family. Ilara Hayes, the unassuming mother, was revealed to be a woman of hidden depths, formidable intellect, and quiet dignity. Their story became a whispered legend, a reminder that genuine partnership, integrity, and loyalty held far more weight than superficial status or inherited privilege. The word reverberated, echoing off the polished walls, shaking the very foundations of the room's carefully constructed hierarchy. It wasn't a question, nor a casual greeting. It was a declaration, a powerful assertion of ownership and unwavering loyalty, delivered with the force of a man who would move mountains for the woman he loved. The incident at Northwood Academy became more than just a school scandal. It became a defining moment for the city's social landscape. It forced a reckoning, a quiet reevaluation of values, and a stark reminder that true power lay not in the loudest voice or the most expensive suit, but in character, in courage, and in the quiet, unshakable bond between two people who truly understood each other. The old guard, who had judged by appearances, had been taught a harsh, unforgettable lesson. And Ilara, the woman they had so casually dismissed, had become, in her own quiet way, a legend. Mrs. Albright's jaw dropped, her perfectly coiffed hair seeming to stiffen in shock. Ms. Jenkins gasped. A small, choked sound. The Prestons, who had been leaning back in their chairs with smug expressions, snapped forward, their eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning horror. The dust settled, but the echoes of the Northwood Academy incident resonated far beyond the school gates. For Ilara, the confrontation, initially a source of humiliation, had become a profound turning point. The need to hide, to remain invisible, had finally dissipated. She no longer felt the need to conceal her capabilities or her past. Secure in the unwavering love and respect of Alexander, the quiet shield she had built around herself had served its purpose. But now, it could finally be lowered. The secretary in the outer office, who had been discreetly watching, let out a small squeak of surprise, dropping a pen. She had recognized him, not from the local news, but from the glossy pages of Global Business Weekly and Forbes. Her eyes, wide with recognition, darted from the man in the doorway to the principal, then back again. A silent scream of, "Oh my God, it's him!" forming on her lips. Ilara found a newfound confidence blooming within her. Not a loud, arrogant confidence like the Prestons, but a deep, quiet assurance in her own worth. She continued to volunteer at Lily's school, but now, her suggestions were listened to with genuine respect. Her presence acknowledged with deference. She occasionally attended social events with Alexander, no longer shrinking from the curious glances, but meeting them with a calm, knowing smile. She was Ilara Hayes, wife of Alexander Thorne, yes. But more importantly, she was Ilara, a woman of formidable intellect, unshakable integrity, and boundless love for her family. Mr. Preston, whose face had gone from smug to ashen in an instant, fumbled for his phone, his fingers, trembling slightly, frantically typed a name into a search engine. The image that popped up on his screen, large and unmistakable, was the man standing in front of them, Alexander Thorne, CEO of Thorne Global Industries, a titan of industry whose name was synonymous with innovation, power, and unimaginable wealth. He was a man whose company owned half the city, whose influence stretched across continents, and whose personal life was notoriously private. Lily, too, flourished. The trauma of the bullying faded, replaced by the security of knowing her parents were an unyielding force for good. She saw them as heroes, not just because of their power, but because of their unwavering commitment to truth and fairness. Her laughter returned, brighter and more carefree than ever. She continued to excel in her art, her creativity unburdened by fear. The incident, though painful, had taught her a valuable lesson about standing up for herself and the power of family unity. Mrs. Preston, seeing the look on her husband's face, felt a cold dread creep up her spine. She had seen that face on magazine covers, too, though she'd never connected it to the simple Ilara Hayes. The man who had just shouted "wife" was not just a CEO. He was the CEO, a figure of immense, almost mythical power in their world. The Prestons, stripped of their influence and connections, eventually faded from the city's elite circles. Their arrogance had been their undoing, and the justice served was thorough and undeniable. Northwood Academy, under new leadership and with a renewed commitment to its stated values, began a slow but genuine transformation, becoming a more inclusive and supportive environment for all its students, not just the privileged few. The ripple effect of Alexander and Ilara's stand had indeed created lasting change. A profound, almost suffocating silence descended upon the office. No one moved, no one spoke. The air was thick with the weight of shattered assumptions, of condescension turned to terror. Mrs. Albright's face, usually so composed, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, her eyes darting between Ilara and Alexander, as if trying to reconcile the unassuming woman with the powerful man who had just claimed her so unequivocally. The family moved forward, stronger and more united than ever before. Their bond, forged in the crucible of adversity, was now unbreakable. Alexander continued to dominate the business world, but his priorities remained clear: Ilara and Lily. He cherished Ilara's quiet strength, her wisdom, and her unwavering moral compass, knowing that she was the true anchor of his life. He often joked that he was merely her muscle, while she was the brains and heart of their formidable team. Ilara, however, remained perfectly still. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips, a silent acknowledgement of the chaos she had just unleashed. She watched their faces, the rapid succession of emotions playing out: shock, fear, dawning realization, and finally, abject terror. She felt a quiet satisfaction. They had demanded real authority. They had dismissed her, and now, the true power had arrived, not with a flashy entrance or a boastful declaration, but with a single thunderous word that had shattered their entire perception of reality. The game had not just changed, it had been irrevocably overturned. Ilara, for her part, found joy in rediscovering aspects of her past self, perhaps even quietly advising Alexander on some of his more innovative philanthropic ventures. Her sharp mind still keen and insightful, she had found her true value, not in public acclaim or corporate power, but in the genuine love of her family and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had fought for what was right. The word wife hung in the air, a seismic shockwave that had instantly shattered the polished veneer of the principal's office. A profound, almost suffocating silence descended, so absolute that the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. No one moved. No one dared to speak. The Prestons, Mrs. Albright, and Miss Jenkins were frozen in various states of disbelief, their faces contorted by a mixture of shock, dawning horror, and utter humiliation. The story of the unassuming mother and the CEO husband became a quiet legend, a testament to the enduring power of genuine connection, integrity, and the unwavering strength of a family united against injustice. It was a reminder that true authority lies not in titles or wealth, but in character, in courage, and in the love that binds us. And in the quiet moments, when Alara watched Lily laugh, free and happy, she knew that every challenge, every hardship, had been worth it. Justice had been served, not with a bang, but with a quiet, undeniable triumph that resonated deep within their hearts. Their new chapter was one of peace, strength, and a lasting sense of profound, quiet victory. Mrs. Albright's usually impeccable composure had utterly disintegrated. Her mouth hung slightly agape, her eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on Alexander as if he were a phantom. Her mind raced, frantically trying to reconcile the quiet, modestly dressed Alara Hayes with the man who stood before them, Alexander Thorne. The name, the face, the sheer, undeniable presence of him. It clicked into place with a sickening lurch, the CEO whose company had recently acquired a significant stake in the very investment fund that managed Northwood Academy's endowment. The man whose charitable foundation had just pledged a multi-million-dollar donation to a rival elite school last week. Her carefully constructed world of influence and status was crumbling around her. She had just dismissed his wife. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales of unexpected heroes and lasting justice, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Ms. Jenkins, pale and trembling, clutched her hands together, her earlier condescending smile replaced by a look of sheer terror. She had made snide remarks about Alara's background and understanding. She had implied Lily was a problem child from a different background. The full weight of her arrogant assumptions crashed down on her, leaving her breathless with dread. She imagined the inevitable disciplinary actions, the career-ending fallout,